Hello.
Hey mate, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank God. Thanks for arranging this.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do it. Thanks for jumping on. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
my pleasure. My pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Yeah. I've been watching with fascination your series with Guy and John, the Mysticism and Dialogo series, and
Oh
really
yeah, that was a lot
enjoying.
of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you look
That
like
was
you're
good.
enjoying yourself.
Yeah, it's just so much fun to be able to, like you're into these topics and you're reading and you're thinking, and there are very few people like on the street that you can like hash that with and really clarify thoughts and come to new ways of thinking about these things. And then you get a chance to sit down and just go at it with some really bright minds who have a lot of passion and a lot of respect for holding that space for dialogue. So that's definitely it's been a lot of fun, that's for sure.
Yeah, 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 very cool. And I can see the care that you all have and the reverence for the space and the topics that you're discussing as well. And it comes through in the video. It's really nice to see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very new and old form of discussion where it's not about trying to one up the other person or trying to show off your intelligence. It's really about holding that space, as you said, for that mutual encounter and for the capacity to hear each other and help each other grow in those thoughts. So
Mm,
it's a really beautiful experience to be a part of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And your whole channel, I mean, Seekers of Unity is an exploration of mysticism and different philosophers through the ages, particular focus on Jewish mysticism, but as well as Jewish mysticism, other thinkers and yeah, I'm curious about your personal experience. Um, have you had mystical experiences? Have you found these altered states of consciousness in yourself?
Yeah, I generally decline answering that question directly for a few reasons, and I think the main reason, besides for I think things that happen with a certain degree of privacy are sometimes best kept private.
Hmm.
Um, there's but I think that in addition to that, I think that sometimes we overemphasize the experience of mysticism, and I think that experience is only really one third of mysticism. I think we can divide it best into experience, theory, and practice. And when we focus on either at the expense of the other, something is out of kilter. And I see that there's a real hyper focus on experience today,
Hmm.
and that experience can very quickly turn into just a self-serving, another hedonistic or egoistic pursuit. And I think that part of the classic message of the mystics is that really, like, every moment of waking life is a capacity to be in that awareness, to be in that experiences, which is really no experience. And yeah, I mean, even a term like an altered state of consciousness, like our consciousness is always being altered. I know that sounds trite, but but I really do think that the mystics strive not to get on top of that Everest of experience, but to live on a constant in a space of love and acceptance and unity and compassion. So I'm trying to pull the emphasis away from individual moments, as important as those moments can be, and they can be tremendous and transformative and awakening. But instead, if we can move the attention and the discourse to to a ever-present mysticism, um, a lived mysticism, and this is something which we spoke about a lot with Buber, where he tries to move the emphasis as well from from experience to life, from
Yes. Yes.
Bliss to Leben, as he calls it in the German.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, the bringing Buber in is interesting to me. Like I notice myself when you break it down in that way, experience, theory, practice, and experience being, a third of it. I my emphasis, I guess, in my journey, I'm a practicing Buddhist, and like searching for these altered states in some sense through meditation and other means. And so the experience has been very important to me, experiences that I've had, and trying to integrate certain experiences. And like you say, in an ongoing daily lived experience. So not you know, revering these really rarefied spaces that we sometimes find to the exclusion of others. Sorry, have I lost you? You are frozen on my screen. Oh, you're back. You're muted.
Oh, sorry, that was just an alarm which threw me off the call. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Yeah, so I like the point that you're bringing it back to the everyday lived experience, because that is the fundamental ground that we have to start from. But there is something attractive to me about what is possible in the human consciousness arena, and you know, I have had some experiences, and trying to integrate those experiences into my daily life have been important for me. But yeah, the way you bring in Buber there is interesting, because, and particularly like the I thou and the relating, and how Buber found the energy that flows between two or more people to be really, really paramount. And you know, that's where God exists. Like the energy that flows between us is God. And if you're just sitting in a cave meditating, trying to find this transcendent state, and you're not taking that into your life and relating to people on a daily basis from a place of love and care and compassion, then what the hell's the point in sitting in a cave and meditating? Like that's just, it's just, it doesn't mean anything really. So yeah, I do think that it's important to be able to embody these things in a really grounded way, for sure. But I find myself struggling when you are saying, oh, the experience is only like 1/3 of the thing. I'm like, well, the experience is also important, because it seems to be like a pointer to something greater that can be useful.
Yeah, I don't mean to take away from the importance of the experience at all. I think that the experience is really a strong catalyst to show people the possibilities, the ways of cognizing reality that are fundamentally different to what we're used to. So when we juxtapose altered states of consciousness with ordinary states of consciousness, it's that there's like this, to use the language that William James uses, there's a thin veil that if we just slightly tear it aside and move it aside, we can see this new world, and it's a world filled with beauty and grandeur and awe and mystery, noesis and unity. And these are all things that are discovered in that. What I think though is, and so I think that that's really important, but I think that the experience is there to guide us towards something, and I don't think it's there to guide us to the experience, if that makes sense. It's to show us how reality itself is and can be lived in accordance with. There's a great line from Alan Watts speaking about mystical experiences that are precipitated by psychedelics or entheogenics, and he says that once you get the message, you can hang up the phone, right? Like it's the same with with psychedelics or chemicals. Like I have no problem with psychedelics or people using that as a means to come to a realization that what they were valuing in life was leading them down paths that were not going to be healthy for them, and they need to reevaluate. But if you spend the rest of your life tripping on acid, like you'll have a fun time, but what have you done? What have you done? What have you done for yourself? What have you done for the world? What have you done for the people around you? So that necessity to get the message and the message is like really crystal clear, and then to hang up the phone. And hang up the phone means that you're now going to go put the work in to
Mm.
try and implement that, to try and live your life in accordance with that message. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, the problem is that there's a lot of like packaging here that makes things tricky. Like even the idea of like the lonely mystic, like the solitary mystic, is something that we see a lot in poetry and in film and in art. But in reality, mystics almost always, we're in communes, we're in fellowship, we're in sisterhoods and brotherhoods. In Jewish mysticism, we call them the Chevraya Kadisha, the holy brotherhood. It was never really an isolated thing. So a lot of, I think a lot of the ways that we think about mysticism perhaps inhibit mysticism from being the positive force that it could be in the world. If we think about it instead as something which is an embodied experience, a lived experience, an incommunal experience, and one which has a demand upon us, then we can allow those transformative experiences to actually begin to transform us, and not just to hang out in those experiences. So without at all trying to take away from their importance and their transformativity, but just to realize that they're really just a call into the work. And that's really just the beginning. It's not the end.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. I do very deeply believe in the value of community and the relationships that exist in community, and showing up as much as one can in community for the other, and being of service, and being present, even just being present with another in relationship is really important and can be so easily lost. And yes, I think the lone mystic is often exalted and emphasized too much. And it is in community that the real, I like the way you use the term work. You've used it a couple of times. Like, the work seems to be in community, because it's in human relationships that we get triggered, and our survival mechanisms come into play, and our defenses come into play, and all of that stuff becomes really apparent and in our face. And so it does seem that there is some work there to be done to be able to start to embody the insights that mysticism can afford. Yeah, so I'm curious about, when you refer to the work, what is it that you're referring to when you say the work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I appreciate that question. And I fully agree with the emphasis that you're placing, and the importance of realizing the directives in that shared space. When I say work, I mean it's a word that is used a lot. I think it's a word that Ram Dass popularizes a lot in his discourse around mysticism, but I'm actually translating it directly from the Hebrew. So there's a term in Hebrew called avodah, which means work or service or worship, depending on the context. And there are different types of work when we speak within the realm of the mystical, within the realm of Kabbalah and Chassidut and other forms of Jewish mysticism. And the work, to put it into two categories, happens on the macrocosmic, on the cosmic level, on the world outside, and then there's the inner world, and there's obviously reflect one another because there is no separation. And on the external level, without getting too cosmological and mythological about it, unless that's what you're interested in, we speak about avodat habirurim. There's the work of sorting and sifting and rectifying and elevating. Essentially, the myth is that when God creates the world, there's a previous iteration of reality which shatters, and the sparks, the shards, the energy, the life force of that reality falls into the next iteration, which is our world. And it's our job to go around and to find those sparks, with like to detect them and to elevate them, to reincorporate them back into the pleroma, back into the Godhead. And that's how the messianic era comes, when they're all finally reincorporated. So that's on the external level, and that means that we can, practically what it means, I mean, there's many ways of reading it, but it's to work with the physical world around us, to see, to find the godliness, to find the life and beauty within the world, so that it can be elevated and brought back to its real purpose, about doing things um, about engaging with materiality for its highest purpose. And that's a very deep teaching. The other work is the avodah pnimit, or avodah shbalev. It's the work in the heart. And the work there is essentially it's the same thing that's happening outside, it's happening on the inside, to the work of refining oneself, of purifying oneself, of cleansing oneself. Through life, we pick up a lot of confusion and a lot of mixed messages and a lot of dross and a lot of temptation. A lot of these things go on, at least in the language of Jewish mysticism. And the work is to really sit in silence and to be active within, to work through oneself. And that work is really expressed when you encounter the other. So I like that way you said it. So you could sit in prayer or meditation, in supplication, in body movements for an hour. The question is, when you then bump into your friend, your sibling, a stranger, what then comes is really where the work shows. And it's essentially, it's about taking ourselves and working on our character traits and trying to move ourselves from our own selfishness and from our own self-centered egoism and from the hatred and rage and guilt and all of those things that plague us, that hold us down, to move to a place of love and compassion and unity and selflessness and altruism, to really shift our own values and to shift our internal self. And that's kind of when I speak about work, I'm speaking about it in that technical sense, on both the cosmic and the personal.
Mm. Yeah, wow, that's really cool, because that lines up with Buddhism and a lot of Eastern mysticism that I've been involved with, where the work is like it is purifying oneself in a sense. It is like becoming more conscious and more aware of the energy that you're carrying, what's going on in your body, your feeling states, your thoughts, your mental patterns, your behavioral patterns. And like, as you become more conscious of those things, you're able to make different choices in life. You're able to choose self-sacrifice, for example, to help another. You're able to be aware of what might be going on for people around you, and to be able to do something to help them out, or to lift them, or to encourage them, or whatever it may be. So there is there is that sense of the inner work anyway being a purification of sorts into higher states of awareness, which then facilitate or allow other things to you, make other things available to you in life that weren't previously available to you. Kind of changes the salience landscape, to use a term that John would use. And yeah, so those concepts that you just outlined do line up pretty closely with the Buddhist sort of take on it, which is nice.
Yeah, I would expect them to, and this is something which I'm discovering when I'm on this journey of comparative mysticism, to use the technical term, which is that a lot of these truths are really real truths, and they're human truths, and therefore they really have a global and universal purchase on them. There are some streams of mysticism that are directly influenced by each other historically. I mean, we know that a lot of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish mysticism, there's a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of fertilization of ideas, a lot of shared language that goes back to Neoplatonism and other shared sources, a lot of biblical language that makes it into the three of them. But when you travel to the Far East, or you travel to North and South America, you travel to indigenous shamanistic communities, and you find a lot of these same messages going on, it kind of does make one stop and think of like, wow, maybe there is some sort of shared common basic truths that humans have discovered by being aware and being present to reality. And I think what's so fundamentally compelling about this, and what I'm trying to really work to show why this is compelling and why this is persuasive to a normal modern thinking person. Sorry, there's a bit of noise in the background, my apologies.
Okay.
Because I think these are things that we all know to be true. Like, I don't think anything that we've been saying up until now, I mean, we're employing maybe some cosmological narratives that one can choose to interpret how they will, but these are all really things that are really basic and common sense. And I think so much when you look at even a lot of modern psychology, I was very turned on by the humanistic psychologists, Fromm and Maslow and Jung and that whole stream of thinkers, where they really come to these real same conclusions where we know what is best for us. We know how we would like to be living our lives. We know that we don't want to be just chasing our pride and our ego and running for the dollar and trying to outbid the other person. We know that we want to be living in kindness and compassion and tenderness. It seems to me that the mystics are just telling us what we really already know and what we already want to think. And therefore, when we find these commonalities between Buddhism and Jewish mysticism, which are like so far apart culturally and linguistically and historically, it just re-emphasizes that notion that these are just simple, beautiful human truths. Where the experience comes in is that these things are empirical as well, and they're experienced, and the mystics that experience these come to the same conclusions as well. There's a lot of fear in today's modern, more intellectual and academic world about making any universal claims for good reasons. But I think that we have to come back to these basic human truths and recognize them for what they are, and recognize that we don't necessarily want to be living the way we're living individually, communally, societally. We're just not heading down a path that we want to be going with this, commodification of attention, where every second of a day is caught by advertisements and screens, and our relationships become shallow and vapid. We know that we want something better. We know that we want to return to something quieter and more meaningful and more peaceful. Like they become so painfully self-evident, that it's beautiful to see these traditions really in accordance on these points.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then it's so where my mind goes next is it's like, well, it may be plain to see that we don't want to be living this way, where we're just serving ego and chasing the dollar and instrumentalizing everything. That seems pretty obvious to me too. But then how, as a culture, do we shift that? Because these things have a momentum to them that are so strong, and that, our systems are designed around it, our political, economic, health systems, our cultural systems. So they just continue as they are. And there's not really a lot of influence that we can have over them. I mean, we can live our own lives and exemplify how we feel life should be lived in compassion and love and acceptance and all that good stuff. But it's not really going to have an impact on the culture if a few individuals are doing that. Maybe through the domino effect over time that can start to seep out. But these ideas have been around for millennia, since the time of Buddha and Christ, and these ideas have been practiced, and the theory has been available, and the experiences have been had, and we haven't really changed all that much as far as I can tell in terms of consciousness levels over at least 2, if not 3 millennia. So how do we ground these ideas into the culture, into the fabric of society?
Yeah. So people might accuse me for what I'm about to say of being young, naive, and overly optimistic.
How old are you, Zevi? Can I ask?
Yeah, I'm 27.
Oh, wow. You are a lot younger than I pegged you for. I'm 34. But
nice.
Oh, 27. There you go.
Yeah. I think like this. I think that there is change coming, and I think there's change happening. And I think that the change begins within, and that's the oldest truth, and that remains true. But that's not an excuse to quietism. It's not an excuse to therefore just retreat and just spend our entire lives just trying to fix ourselves, to the neglect of everything else, because that's not fixing ourselves, because our true self is integrated with the rest of reality. That's premise number 1 of mysticism. I think that the capacity that we have today for anyone to reach out and to find an audience, to build community, to find people who are really interested in making change, is something which we never had before. If we look at the great moments in human history where change did happen, it was because there was new technologies available to make those changes happen. many historians attribute the spread of Christianity in the moment that it did because of a very lucky confluence of the Roman Empire needing a new religion, the spread of literacy and language, a lot of what Karl Jaspers called the axial age, where a lot of the great religions flourished in about the 500 BCE. Also is about a new birth in the communication and the way that messages could be spread with the alphabet coming into play at that time. So, and I think that the new technologies that we have, namely the internet, which we're sitting here right now and using, is a new paradigm for reality. And whether you want to analyze it from a media perspective, from someone like McLuhan speaking about how the medium is the message and the inherent relationality of those things, or whether you want to look at someone like more of a mystic, Pierre Dechaudet-Taylorhart, who speaks about the noosphere that is now encompassing the world, where our thoughts can be transmitted all the way from Perth to Jerusalem and back, and then to the rest of the world. The capacity for us to take hold of these technologies and really utilize them for a positive change is something which no one yet understands the power of. And the same technology is there to be employed for further instrumentalization and further selfishness and further aggrandizing the ego. And we see that happen. And we see the way that celebrity blows up around petty things, around nonsense that talks to the lowest common denominator of the human, that speaks straight to the amygdala. So what we have today is we have the technologies to make the change if we so like to. We have the science and the information to understand how these things are happening. We understand our neural pathways. We understand our reward systems. We understand all of these things. We understand I mean, we have people like John who are teaching at the highest levels of the neurochemistry and the cognitive functions of what's going on here, and how we can rewire and retap in to not allow those systems to undermine us, but to allow us to flourish with them. We also, I think we have to realize that these systems are not just these mammoth, impersonal behemoths that are beyond us. The systems are made up of individuals, made up of people. We are the system, right? And therefore, when we change, the system changes. There is no system in abstraction. There is no system in Plato's realm of ideas that isn't made up by me and you. So when the decisions that we make to change our own lives and to move our attention from places of negativity and envy and darkness and hatred to spaces of love and light, to elevate our consciousness, as you put it, those changes are happening, and those changes they go into the system. And I think the way that we visualize the system is very important. If we think about something which is totally broken and totally unfixable and totally beyond us, and we feel weak and disempowered, we will be weak and disempowered. But if we think about ourselves as integral players in that, people that have a voice, people that are able to change ourselves, and not that we're perfect, not that we are, it's funny actually, your name, right, is the Buddhist name for the coming Redeemer, for the coming Messiah, almost, if we can use that a Abrahamic term. If we all saw ourselves as such, if we all saw ourselves as the Maitreya's, as the Buddhas, as the Christs, as the Messiahs to this generation, without becoming megalomaniacal about it, but being humble and realizing that we do have a role to play, and we do have a role in changing ourselves and influencing our families and our communities and our countries, and being open to the change that is happening, then a new morning can dawn. And that morning comes not because we waited for the sun to rise, but it came because we made it happen.
Mm. 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 Yeah, I feel myself drawn to that perspective as well, that optimism, and I do feel like we can have an influence, and it is true that we do have new tools available to us that we've never had in human history, and those tools can be leveraged for change. That's absolutely true. But if I were to play devil's advocate, I would pick up on the point that you also made around these tools being used in the opposite direction by people that are playing to the lowest common denominator. and are successfully amplifying their message of hate and greed and jealousy and lust and all of that. And yeah, who knows how it plays out in the end. And I would like to think that it plays out in a positive direction. But there is that feeling of sometimes holding oneself above hopelessness, trying to grasp onto hope in the face of sheer hopelessness, and trying to forge a path that one believes is good, in the face of so much adversity and seeming obstacles to actually making traction. And look, I see people doing amazing things, like your channel, for example. You know, you've taken a passion project and you've put your message out there consistently over a period of years, and you have like 9,000 subscribers now. So you're having an impact on the world and on probably 9,000 more people that are interested in your ideas and enjoying your ideas and sharing your ideas, hopefully, as well. So there are small pockets where this stuff is happening in a positive direction. And yeah, it's nice. It feels good to believe that that is going to make a difference. But I wonder if that feeling good is me deluding myself into wanting to believe that, or if that is actually something that is going to change. And that's where I kind of am at the moment. Like, I'm naturally optimistic, but wow, it's a big project. Like any change is a big project.
Yeah. Well, I really hear you, and I hear the realism in your voice. Maybe let's frame it like this. Talking from just a scientific, materialistic perspective, not talking about like spiritual narratives, we're here to live one life, right? Spiritual traditions may disagree, and that's okay, but at least from the average perspective, scientific perspective, we have one life to live, and it's fairly short, it's fairly long, depending on how you look at it. The question is, how do we want to live that one life? Do we want to live that one life resigned to our own inherent failure, resigned to the systems within and without that have us caught in our own loops, chasing our own tails, with growing frustration and growing, decay of the self and decay of the planet? Is that where we want to be living? Or do we want to hold on to a hope, whether it's a real or false hope, and live our lives committed to the possibility of leaving this world a better place than where we came into it? And I think that when we let go of our hope, whether it's grounded or not, and I think we can embrace it even if it's ungrounded, when we let go of our hope, we accept instead a life of despair and nihilism, and we give in to I'm going to use a theological term here, even though it's not necessarily a comfortable one. We give into the evil that's rampant within and all around us. And embracing, I simply think that embracing the hopefulness and the drive, that messianic desire to make our lives better and to bring redemption to us, to the people around us, and hopefully to the world around us, that life is a better life lived than a life given up to despair and hopelessness, even if hopelessness is, in the end of the day, the better decision. And I don't even know that it is. I mean, if we want to quote historians and academics here, someone like Steven Pinker makes a very strong case that with rationality and enlightenment, we're moving towards the best place that humanity has ever been in all of history. And there's definitely good reasons to disagree with him. There are many people that do. But I think, putting aside the question of, and this may be a bit of a postmodern perspective, putting aside the questions of whether actually there is hope or there isn't hope, living as if there is hope, I think is definitely a better life to live. You wake up with a purpose and with a drive, and you fail all the time. I mean, so many times, even the project which you so beautifully mentioned and gave credit for moving people and changing people, and I really hope it is, and I do get messages like that from people. I myself can get caught up in the ego side of it. It's like, oh my God, Zevi, look how many numbers, look at this, let's get more, let's grow it. And when I realize, when I see myself chasing my ego, even when we try to do good, which is okay sometimes to harness the ego, that's a bit of a separate discussion. But when I see myself chasing the ego, I realize that I'm just not enjoying the journey and the process anymore. I'm not allowing myself to surrender to the beauty of being able to share and teach and explore. And I think that when we catch ourselves in those loops and we allow ourselves to live from a place of altruism, from a place of gratitude, from a place of hopefulness, it's just empirically a better experience.
Mm,
So why not do that?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I agree with your conclusion. I agree with, well, at the end of the day, we need to act as if being loving and accepting and compassionate is the way forward. And I totally agree with you on that. The one step before that about where you said whether the hope is a true hope or a false hope. Well, maybe the discrimination between hopelessness and hopefulness is not necessary at all. Maybe one can step beyond that juxtaposition and just go, well, I don't know how things are going to turn out. There's just this present moment. There's just here and now. And so here and now, I'm going to do the best I can to serve my fellow brother or my fellow sister or whatever it is. And who knows where this crazy journey is going to take us, but this is the best we can do here and now. And so that's what I'm going to do. And then, yeah, and then it's a separate question as to whether you need hope to drive that, or the question of hope is irrelevant anyway. You can kind of let that go and just go, well, I'm going to act in the best way I can regardless, and we'll see what results come. And then we'll change like a scientist would. You know, you formulate a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, you reach some results and you form conclusions from what you've observed. And then you might come up with a new hypothesis based on that experience. And then you go again and like you keep iterating on that hypothesis until you get closer and closer to the truth. And a good scientist is meant to be detached from the outcome, you know, is meant to just see the outcome in all its glory or in all its warts, if that's what's there. And so, yeah, I think at the end of the day, we stand on the same ground in terms of just doing the best we can as individuals under any circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective to sort of transcend that binary of hope and hopelessness. It's an interesting one. I have to think about it. My feeling generally is that we have to try and maximize on all the tools that we have to inspire us to be those best functioning humans that we can for ourselves and the world around us. And I think that hope is a really strong tool in that arsenal. And I wouldn't be so quick to let go of it. But I do hear what you're saying. I think, yeah, I had another thought about it, but it escaped me, so that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good perspective as well. I mean, I do think hope has some power to it. It does have a drive and an energy behind it, and it can be harnessed for the positive. That's for sure. I think it can sometimes run out of momentum. Like you can be really pushing for a certain outcome. You know, we're talking quite abstractly here, so it's difficult to get like tangible examples on this, but you can be pushing for a certain outcome and then not really getting that outcome, not achieving what you're going for, and then you fall into despair as a result of that and lose hope. So it can have the opposite effect if it's not self-sustaining in some ways. It can be detrimental to the energy and drive. But yeah, well, if you can tap into that hope and keep it sustaining itself in some way, then yeah, it probably is useful in the journey.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, that it is a bit of a double-edged sword where there's nothing quite as breaking and shattering as a broken hope. And that's definitely something which is very true. There's an interesting discussion around this in Jewish history around the concept of the Messiah. And the Messiah, in my mind, is really just the embodiment of hope. That's what the Messiah means. It's the figure or the place where we invested that idea of the Jewish energy. Is the Jewish energy of hope is placed on that placard called the Messiah. And there's this notion in Jewish history of the false Messiah, right? Of the one who comes to say, I'm here to redeem you, and does just the opposite. And in many cases in Jewish history, that's a very, very devastating potentiality. And the best known example is Shabtai Tzvi, who has 17th century-ish in Turkey and the Middle East, convinces a lot of Jews, very, very large proportions of the Jewish community and Jewish leaders, that he is the coming Messiah. And many people sell their homes because they're expecting any moment to be swept up and to return to the promised land. And what ends up happening, for those that know history and for those that study history, as a lesson for today, Tzvi ends up being taken into prison by the Sultan, by the Caliphate, and he, on threat of death, converts to Islam. Many Jews convert to Islam with him, but the messianism that he brought is entirely shattered, and many people are left far, far, far worse off after this ordeal than before the ordeal. They're left physically impoverished for selling their houses, but more than that, they're left impoverished spiritually because they put all their hope in him and they thought he was the one, and he never does show up in the way they expected him. So as a Jew holding onto the consciousness of Jewish history, I'm very aware of the dangers of false hope. And there's a great line from there's a German 20th century German Jewish philosopher, Franz Rosenzweig, who writes about the false Messiah as the reincarnating, remanifesting hope of the Jew, right? The only reason why there is the possibility for a false Messiah is because the Jew hopes that there will be a true Messiah. And he writes about the two camps, those that believe in the false Messiah as a possibility, and those that reject the false Messiah. And he says that those that believe in him, they have hope and faith. And those, I might actually, if you're interested, I want to read this quote for you.
Yeah,
because it's a really tremendous quote. I'm not going to do it justice from memory. And I think this very much speaks to the heart of what we're speaking about here. Here it is. Here, sorry, it took me a bit longer to find than I thought it would. He writes like this: for the expectation of the Messiah, this is Franz Rosenzweig in a passage commenting on Judah Halevi's poem, a 12th century Jewish philosopher and poet. For the expectation of the Messiah, by which and for the sake of which Judaism lives and would be an empty theologumenon, a mere idea, idle babble, were it not over and over again made real and unreal, illusion and disillusion in the form of the false Messiah. The false Messiah is as old as the hope of the genuine one. He is the changing form of the enduring hope. Every Jewish generation is divided by him into those who have the strength of faith to be deceived, and those who have the strength of hope not to be deceived. Those having faith are better, those having hope are stronger. The former bleed as sacrifices on the altar of the eternity of the people. The latter serves as priests before this altar, until the one time when it will be the reverse. The faith of the faithful becomes the truth, and the hope of the hoping becomes the lie. Then, and no one knows when this then will not happen, even today, then the task of those who hope comes to an end, and one who still belongs to the hopeful and not the faithful, when the morning of that day breaks, risks the danger of being rejected. This danger hangs over the apparently unimperiled lives of those who hope. So this division between those who hope and those who have faith, that this now is the moment of redemption, those hope that the redemption will still come, is a constant in Rosenzweig's beautiful language, is the constant dialectic that keeps the hope moving forward, right? That on the one hand, and I think another way of putting it is that there's this dual perspective where we can feel at times that we do live in a redeemed world. We do feel like that this distinction between samsara and nirvana no longer exists, and we're already experiencing that blissfulness of reality. And then there's stepping back to the place where we really do experience that suffering. We really experience the dukkha within and without, and we want to be there to change it. And being in both that space of hope and faith, hope that things will be better and faith that things are already better. In some sense, I mean, Rosenzweig puts it onto two different camps, but in some sense that happens within as well, right? Where half of us is the sacrifice and half of us is the priest in his language.
Yeah. I like the way he did that, the faith and the hope, because it was almost like the faithful have courage to take that leap and bet everything on now, this Messiah being the true Messiah. It's an interesting distinction. I wonder in Jewish mysticism, is there like in the forms of mysticism that I'm familiar with, it's often you have a guru or you have a teacher, and the teacher will hand down teachings and talk about their experience towards enlightenment, so awakening, and practices that have assisted them on their journey towards enlightenment. And I wonder if there's a similar concept in Jewish mysticism, particularly. Like, is there a guru model? Is there a teacher model? How does that work?
Yeah. So there have been different models throughout Jewish history of how that's done, but a central theme that unites many of these disparate and continuing traditions in Jewish history is the notion of the tzaddik. The tzaddik, it comes from the Hebrew word tzedek, the person who practices justice and righteousness. And I think it's the closest equivalent to the language you're using of guru. The tzaddik is the person who is able to themselves embody the values which the person who is on their journey is aspiring to be like. And the tzaddik gets different terms throughout Jewish history. The tzaddik is sometimes called the Talmid Chacham, is sometimes called the Rebbe, depending on, and many other terms are attached to this notion of the righteous individual. And the idea is that there is a divine form that the human is created in, because as we read in Genesis, God creates mankind in God's image. Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu, let us make mankind in our image and likeness. And according to much of Jewish thinking, I think the clearest expression of this is in the 16th century Toma Devara, the Palm Tree of Deborah by Moses Cordovero, where he writes that the human is created in the image of God, in the form of God. And going back to the classic Greek distinction between form and matter, we have our own undeveloped potential, which is the matter, the energy that is us, that is not yet defined. And we can conform to the image of the divine. We can be like God. And this is an idea which goes all the way back to the Bible and the Talmud, where God throughout the Bible does certain acts of kindness. And the instruction is to imitate God, imitato Dei, which becomes a very important Christian principle, is to imitate God specifically in three instances that are brought up. God clothes the naked, which is when he gives clothing to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God visits the sick, which is Abraham, and God buries the dead, which is Moses. Those are the three instances that are brought of, and God does many things through the Bible, but we're not told to imitate God when God is smiting the Egyptians or God is destroying the Amalekites. It's when God is tending and caring to people in their most vulnerable moments, when they're literally sick, naked, and dying. And And it's by imitating God that we come to take this chomer, take the matter, the undefined potential of the human, and conform it to that image, the image of a God who is kind and benevolent and caring and humble. And that is what it means to be a God in Jewish thought, and to imitate God and to cleave to God. And the way we do that, where the guru comes into this, is that we do find humans, individuals who practice that, who don't preach about it, but who actually do it, who exhibit and exude, men and women throughout Jewish history, deep humility, deep tenderness, deep wisdom and kindness. And it's through following in their example, them following, they're following the example of God, and we can by proxy follow the example of God through their guidance. Ultimately in Judaism, we don't need mediators. There's actually a prohibition against mediators in Judaism between the self and the divine, with the belief that everyone has full access to the divine, an idea which becomes later very relevant in Protestant theology. But the idea of the mumutsa, of the mediator, there can be a mediator which separates, which says, follow me, follow my word, and it's clearly just rampant ego. And then there's what's known as the mumutsa hamechaber. There's the mediator that instead of being an impediment, it's there to bring the individual closer to God, closer to the true self. And the notion that every human fundamentally, when living in their own true form, is living in bliss and awareness and kindness and love, and living the divine image, is really the ultimate ideal. And it's the tzaddik, it's the rebbe, it's the talmid chacham, it's whatever that term is, the term for guru that's being used, is there simply to guide us on that path, to be an exemplar, to be a dugma chaya, to be a living example of what it can mean to be living that way. So that definitely does play a role in Jewish history. And I mean, there's obviously a lot more. There's also an important role of the teacher in Jewish tradition, which is again modeled after Moses, who's called Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. And every generation is seen to have a perpetuating disciple who becomes then the teacher of the next generation, that links the Jew in whatever generation they live back to Moses. So there are many motifs: the teacher, the role model, the guide. So they definitely do play a role in Jewish history in many ways.
Yeah, cool. And then so I want to ask a personal question now, and you can tell me that that's not appropriate or you're not willing to answer it, but I'm interested in then your practices, your personal practices, or your personal relationship to either a teacher or a role model type figure, or whether, as you said before, that in Judaism there is this concept of having no mediator, of direct access to the divine, and so that sort of also maps onto some experiences that I've had and some ideas that I've heard. But yeah, I'm interested so in your personal practices and how you came to your practices, and then what has your experience been with like a role model figure?
Yeah, sure. So there's kind of a playfulness here, right? Where I think we have to realize that fundamentally we're humans, and we have so much more in common that unites us than divides us. And when we take on labels and roles, they can sometimes divide us and separate us. And I think that it's important to recognize how much me and you have in common before going into beginning to categorize us and separate us, saying, I am a Jew, I'm a this type of, I'm not. We're both humans striving after, intimacy and striving after goodness and kindness. And that's really the base level. On that firm foundation of shared humanity, I do identify as a Hasidic Jew. And just to break that down a little, Hasidism is a term that's used in many moments throughout Jewish history. There's the Hasidim of the Second Temple period, the Hasidim HaRishonim, the first Hasids as they're called. Hasid literally translated as pietist, but actually comes from the word chesed, which means loving kindness, someone who embodies the values of love and kindness. There's the Hasidim of 13th, 12th century Germany, and of 13th century Egypt. But in the 18th century, there was a new Hasidic movement, which was began by Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem in Eastern Europe, in Poland, and spread over Eastern Europe very quickly. And it continued in various branches and schools and dynasties. One of them was the Chabad dynasty, which was began by Shner Zalman of Liadi, the first of 7 rabbis, gurus, masters, these tzaddikim of the Chabad tradition. And I was born into a family that identified as part of that tradition. So de facto, I was born into a tradition that was explicitly espousing Jewish mysticism. Hasidism is a form of contemporary Jewish spiritual revivalism and mysticism, and it is built in the structure of Rebbe and Chassid. So Rebbe is the guru, Rebbe is the leader, and Chassid is the disciple, the accolade. So I do identify as a Chassid. I identify specifically as a Chassid of the seventh Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. He is my Rebbe. And although he physically passed away in 1994, the year I was born, my relationship with him is very real and very deep. And I have discussed that on the channel. And the belief of the Chassid is that the Rebbe, so long as the Rebbe so long as the message of the Rebbe is alive and continues to inspire and continues to move you, then the Rebbe is still alive. And the basic logic is that for those of us that identify with our physical body and identify with that conceptually and practically, we spend more time in the week in the gym and trying to look good than we do on trying to cultivate our spirit and our word. Then when the body dies, where we placed our attention, where we gave our energy to, where we placed the locus of our identity, that is now dead, right? And therefore we are dead. But if we place the locus of our energy somewhere else, if the entirety of my life is dedicated to a message, to an idea, to an ideal, to a soul, to a spirit, that doesn't die if it continues, and therefore my idea carries on. There's a famous line that's said in the Hasidic tradition of one of the earlier Chabad Rebbeim who was passing away. Rebbeim is Rebbe in plural, and he says that although my physical body is leaving, my books, my message, my writings, my words remain with you, and therefore I remain alive. So within a lot of the Jewish world, he's referred simply as the Rebbe because of the popularity and dynamism and what he did in the Jewish world following the Holocaust. So the Rebbe is my Rebbe. And in terms of practice, so there's Jewish life is inundated with Jewish practice from the morning you wake up and take your first breath as a child till the day you go to sleep and take your last breath as a dying person. And there's Jewish practice that articulates how one is supposed to live every single moment. And within the Hasidic and Kabbalistic tradition, there's ways of understanding how all of those practices are ways to unite, l'shem yichud, to unite God, to unite the self, to unite the world. And having grown up in that tradition, a lot of those messages were lost on me because they were just fed to me as a child, and it was things that I was, asked to do without understanding why. And a lot of them were really meaningless to me. And I have been on a journey of trying to find my way back to these practices and back to ways that they are meaningful to me, so that I do the same things now that I did when I was 5 years old, but I can do it now with a renewed sense of meaning and intentionality and purpose. So my actual practice is in flux and is in process and is a journey. And a lot of that has been thanks to incorporating, notions from the tradition that you're identifying with from Buddhism. Bringing zazen into my, Hasidic prayer practice was very helpful.
Wow.
And I think that the importance of having that base realization of humanity, right, before we make our further identifications, is that I can then look to other humans, right, who are doing practices that are bringing them closer to peace and serenity and love, and I can bring them into my practice and inspire my ways of being. So that's a quick word on my practice and my guru relationship. However, I shall say one last thought is that my Rebbe, my guru, very much throughout his leadership and specifically towards the end, very much charged his followers to not be followers, but to become leaders, to go out there and teach. The Rebbe said, even if you only know Aleph, you only know the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, you must go out and teach Aleph. And the Rebbe, very much towards the end of his life, said that my work in bringing about the redemption, the Rebbe was a very messianic character, and that's caught up a lot of the attention and controversy. But the Rebbe said that I've done everything that I can to try and bring the Messiah. And the Rebbe said that from the age of 3, when I was a child in preschool, I had a vision of the world, of a redeemed messianic world. And my entire life, I've been striving to bring that into reality. And the Rebbe very much did that. The Rebbe led an army of people to spread love and kindness and compassion. And the Rebbe towards the end of his life said that, the end of his physical life, said that I've done all I can. It's now in your hands to step up and to be your own Rebbe, to be your own Messiah. And that's a charge which I take very seriously, which is maybe explain the first half of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. That's so cool. I love that. I love that you're taking up that challenge and you're attempting to do honor to that wish of your, I don't want, I'm gonna try and say the word the way you said it. Rabba?
Yeah, well done.
Okay.
Very good.
So you're attempting to do honor to his wish, and I think that's fantastic. And the energy and passion that you bring to that is awesome, and it's evident in the way you speak about these things, which is so cool, so cool. And I love that you've picked up some zazen as well. That's
Yeah.
I like that. And you're building an eclectic mix of practices, whatever works, right? Whatever
Yes.
brings you closer to God is worthy. Yeah, yeah. Very cool. So can I ask about one specific practice that you do? Like, is there a reading, or is there a prayer, or is there something that you really, really feel has some potency to it that you know, when you do it, it invokes the state or the feeling or the awareness that you're looking for?
Yeah. Wow, that's a tough question. I'm gonna instead give you like a family of practices that are
Yeah.
related.
Cool.
I think one of the real and this is something that I spoke about with John about looking to, because John is looking to create an ecology of practices, and I implore John to look to mystical traditions, to religious traditions that have been developing these things for millennia already, to try and take from them. And there's a lot of genius in their constructions. And I think one of the particular geniuses of the Jewish wisdom tradition is around moments of transition, right? Moments of change, of liminality, and it's change of all sort. And I think that in modern society, we, for whatever the reason is, I'm not quite sure how to diagnose this, we totally ignore the power and potency and the importance of moments of transition. So transition happens from child to adult, right? And in contemporary society, we don't have coming of age rituals. There's no, as far as I know, and this is reading Mircea Eliade and Jung and Campbell and mythologists of all sorts, there is no ancient or indigenous society that does not have a coming of age ritual in a very serious way, because what's happening there is that the child is dying and the adult is being born, and you have to enact that and allow the child to die so they can be reborn into a man or woman. So that's just an example. I'm not doing that every day, but just like we have a transition from child to adult, we constantly going through transitions. We are every time that the sun rises and sets, we're transitioning through dusk into a new capacity, a new opportunity. I'll tell you the practices around that in a second. When 1 week ends and another week comes in, that's again a chance for the death of the old and the rebirth of the new. When we celebrate our birthdays, we're celebrating the death of the year that was, and we're allowed to mourn that and to let it go, and then to be reborn into a new year. And so part of what needs to happen in those moments is we have to take account and reflect on what was before us. And I'll focus in on just sort of, you can see how the time span moves from the shortest transitions to the lifelong transitions.
Sorry, Zevi, I'm just going to close the window here. Sure. So keep talking. I just need to close the window because it started raining quite heavily.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, I'm back.
No problem. So these transitions happen from the shortest sort of time frames to the longest. We're always moving through transitions. Things are always, one thing leaves and a new thing comes. What's important in those moments is to take stock of what happened up until that moment, to take an honest judgment of a judgment, not in the sense that an honest discernment perhaps is a better word, because judgment has a negative connotation, to discern how we were doing that last period, and that means how we were during the day. And this is something that I do at night before I go to sleep. The term for this is a cheshbon hanefesh within the language of Jewish mysticism, and you see where you were, and you try to do it without beating yourself up for shortcomings, and without getting too haughty about things you did achieve, just to take an honest awareness and observation, witnessing to what was, right? And allowing yourself to move into the new moment with a freshness that you've let the past was the past, and now we're in a new moment, and some sort of verbal affirmation that now is usually an expression of gratitude, that now is a new moment. So in the morning, I wake up, I say, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechzarti b'nishmati b'chem rabba b'motecha. I give thanks to God, to God is a word which some people don't like, but I'm going to use it anyways. For allowing a fresh start. It doesn't have to be dictated. It doesn't have. And when we go to sleep, we take a moment to reflect, and we say Shema Yisrael before going to sleep, and we say Biyadcha afkid ruchi padita oti Adonai elemet, that in your hands I place my spirit, of God, and I trust that you'll give it back to me refreshed in the morning. So that's on a daily transition, and I think that's very important. When the sun sets, in Judaism, we stop and we say a short prayer, a silent prayer, the mincha prayer, and that's something which has become very important to me again now in my life. In the morning, there is a shacharit prayer, and these are moments of transition which I think are so important. Around the big one, which I want to end off with here, is the weekly transition, right? So according to Judaism, God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the seventh, and we likewise have 6 days of work, spiritual work, material work, physical work, emotional work, and that's the time when things need to be fixed and rectified. On the seventh day, on Shabbat, everything is perfect, and there is nothing more to be fixed. We're living in a messianic state, or at least a taste of it. And before Shabbat comes in, we have to invoke, we have to bring it in, and we do that with kiddush over a glass of wine. And that's a very important ritual for me, transitioning from the week, from a space of work and effort and process and becoming to a place of being and perfection and silence and stillness. That is going into the Shabbat. And on Shabbat, there is no electricity. No active use of electricity, so no telephones, no laptops, no TV. It's just a time for introspection, for sleep, for rejuvenation, for friends. For swear to God, without Shabbat, I would have had a mental breakdown a long time ago. Spending my whole day as a content creator, researching, I'm always on my laptop, always on my phone, always answering emails and talking to people and responding and fielding questions. Shabbat, none of that exists, and honestly, thank God for that. And then when Shabbat ends, the same way that we invoke Shabbat with Kiddush, we end it with Havdalah. We say, until now was Shabbat, and now we're going back into the week. We're going back into the world, and we're reinvigorated to face the world. These moments of bringing awareness, bringing kavanah, bringing intentionality to the transitions that we make, and to allow ourselves to not just ride through the changes of life without being aware of them, but to stop and be aware, be present of the sunset, be present to a setting sun, be present to an ending week, to a beginning week. To me, I mean, that's just one example of a body of practices which are really important to me.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, really cool. I like the way you're bringing that intentionality to that day of rest and silence and stillness. And this is I've put in 6 days of work, and now I'm in a sense enjoying the fruits of my labor, and I won't be doing any work today. I'll just be being, and
Yes.
being is enough. Like, that is sufficient in and of itself. And yeah, that's really nice. We in my community here, in my Sangha that I'm involved with locally, we take retreats each year. So 5 times a year, we'll take either a 4-day retreat or a 7-day retreat. And it is that is the experience. It's like no phones, no laptops, no nothing. You're just, we have 3 meals a day, and we have meditation practice, and we might do some yoga or some Tai Chi or something like that. We'll have group sessions where we're able to speak, but outside of those group sessions, everyone's in silence, so you're not allowed to speak, and you have that time to reflect, and that time to journal, and that time to plan, or whatever it is. But you set the intention of slowing down the mind, slowing down the body, and coming back into that state of rest, relaxation, repair, rejuvenation. And yeah, I find it so important. Just having that 5 times a year, let alone like a day a week, because I run a business. I run an accounting business where I am, so I'm kind of on the go most of the time. On Sundays, I actually try to consciously not put too much on my plate. Like I might spend a few hours in the morning sorting out like my house and chores and stuff like that. But I tend to try and not schedule anything on Sundays because I too, like you, recognize the need for that downtime on a regular basis. But yeah, that's cool. And that transition, like, yeah, I like the way you spoke about the transition from daylight into dusk into nighttime is a transition. The transition from your Saturday evening to your Sunday morning, having a glass of red wine, like perfect. And then the transition of longer periods, like childhood into adulthood, like, yeah, that whole rites of passage thing that I too feel like is so important to consciously move from one epoch of life into another epoch and be aware of what lessons you've learned coming into that, and then what intentions you're setting for yourself as you transition, and where you want to go in life. Like all of that to me deeply resonates as really powerful, and yeah. And yeah, these practices have survived for so long because they have some potency to them. Like they wouldn't have survived if they didn't have something there. So yeah, when you're building an ecology of practices, or you know, the way John refers to a religion that's not a religion, like this is a project that he has as well. It's like, yeah, there's some things to be learned from traditions that have been around for a long time, as opposed to just starting from a blank slate and then trying to build again. Yeah, that's cool. I'm yeah grateful that you shared that with me. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, I deeply agree with you on that. I agree that reinventing the wheel, yeah, is a lot of energy. And when we have some good wheels out there, we can go and see what's happening with them. We can turn to Buddhism, we can turn to Hinduism and Judaism and Christianity and Islam and native traditions, and we can really build something really incredible for those that don't have their own practice, which they're born into. I think that's really important. I think as well, just to go back on what you were highlighting there about transitions. You know, we speak about the pandemic of the man-child. Is that what it's called? Of like these of men who never who've never grown up, who are still, you know, self-entitled, bratty people. And I think the reason why there are so many man children, to use that slang, is simply because no one ever told them, hey, you're no longer a child, you're now a man. And didn't give them a ritualistic space to enact that in serious play in John language, to enact becoming a man. And I think you see this as well with you see this with people that are in their mature years, that act as if they're in their, you know, their 20s and 30s. And I mean, part of that is because in society there's a lot of ageism, and we have a disdain for the elderly, so people perhaps don't want to embrace that. But if we could create spaces, I'm no longer in that stage of life, but some of my mentors before me spoke about this necessity to reconceptualize our aging process, from aging to saging is the catch term that was used, that we can become a sage, and the world needs old people. The world needs sages, people that have experience and have wisdom. We don't need people that are in their 70s and 80s that are acting as if they're in their 40s, and we don't need people that are in their 40s that are acting as if they're 16. We do need to embrace who we are with authenticity and with comfort. So that's the importance of transition is super vital. The importance of an ecology practice is vital, and I think that, listen, the world can be such a tumultuous place. It can be so fraught with distractions and with temptations and with danger, and we can get lost so easily. I mean, what's that expression? All it takes is 3 consecutive bad days to put us in the gutter. And I think that we need to have things that we can come to for refuge. And I think that part of the beauty of Buddhism is the simplicity of its recognizing the inherent pain and suffering and attachment that attachments in this world bring. And to take refuge in, as you were saying in Sangha, I think the Buddhist lines that there's 3 things that we take refuge in, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Yeah. So having a community that we can come back to is so important. And we're recognizing it now through COVID. Who are our communities? Where are our communities? Who are our role models? Who are the Buddhas that we can turn to for guidance? Who's the Rebbe that we can turn to? And ultimately as well, the Dharma. What are the teachings? What are the ideas? What are the principles, the practices, the Torah in Jewish language? And I think having those, what I love about Buddhism is that it really strips things down to these pillars, to these foundations. Like these are the things, these are the four truths, this is the eightfold path, these are the three things of refuge. And I love that because we make things so complicated, and there's the clarity that Buddhism brings, where it's just like you need community, you need ideals, and you need people that can guide you. So to me, these are all things which are really, really important to fall back on and to live in.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the man-child thing, because there is a lot of that happening, particularly with the new generation of millennials, and I think a lot of it is as a society we've lost what it means to be a man, and not to be gender specific, but what it means to be an adult, like what it means to grow into maturity and take on responsibility, and to have people in your care that you are responsible for their lives and their livelihood and their health and their well-being, and that kind of stuff, and what it means to step into that role with consciousness and awareness, and take that. It can be a burden at times. Take that burden on willingly for service of someone else. And yeah, we seem to be moving more and more into a hyper selfish, hyper individualistic, hedonistic world, that loses sight of all of that completely. It's like, how can I increase my pleasure and get my dopamine hits over and over and over again, and avoid pain at all costs? And that's kind of it. That's all I care about. That's how I'm living my life. And it's such a shallow existence, and it's a shame that we seem to have lost this to a large degree as a culture. And yeah, I feel like it's important to get that back. I mean, one of the things that's emphasized in my community is maturity, like having a mature sense of self and a mature approach to being responsible for one's feelings, how one feels, and not blaming other people for a feeling state. And yeah, it's been so important in my journey. I mean, one of the things that I've found has been really actually critical for me has been starting my own business, because in starting my own business, it's a really, really fast way to be shown all of your failure patterns, all of the ways that you make mistakes, and that you shouldn't be continuing to repeat, because your business is going to fail. So you very quickly, when you start your own business, you very quickly either the business fails, or you step up and you change those patterns. That's been really helpful for me. And yeah, it is like, it is a shame, I think, that we've lost this to a large degree, and there doesn't seem to be much value placed on maturity in society today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's really a question of perspective. I think that the challenge here is that it's easier just to think about the next 5 seconds, right? What's going to make me comfortable between now and then to do that again and to do that again. And for the brain, that's very easy. Like, you don't have to make any projections, any forecasts. You could just live, the animal, maximizing its pleasure, minimizing its pain from moment to moment. And that's definitely very easy. But when we begin to expand our perspective, when we begin to have foresight, the Jewish sages say chacham einav b'rasho, that the wise person, their eyes are in their head, where they see with their mind, not just with their physical eyes, not just what's in front of them, they see also what's to come. That chacham ezehu chacham haroeh et hanolad, who is wise? One who sees what will be born, what is yet to come from the actions of the present moment, the consequences, the eventualities. And I think what happens is when we shift this perspective from just thinking about now, and this is something which has been bore out in lots of studies. There was the famous marshmallow experiment, which most people know about already, about delayed gratification. This is the thing. We know this to be true empirically, psychologically, scientifically, and the spiritual traditions have been telling us long before the sciences as well, is that when we think in terms of longer term, when we think in terms of not immediate gratification, but sustained gratification, when we think in terms of responsibility, there is some sacrifice. We do sacrifice something in the present moment, but we take on responsibility. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. It's not fun. but the fulfillment that brings, the fulfillment that we get from sustaining a practice of responsibility to ourselves and to others is infinitely more gratifying than just being gluttonous in the moment. And when we're gluttonous in the moment, all we're left with is a stomachache after. But when we take a responsibility and we can stand up as men and women into the roles that we're called for, that we're needed for, it's the gratification is so much more. So even from a simple hedonistic perspective, if someone was a clever hedonist, they wouldn't be stuffing their faces, and I'm using just that as a metaphor for whatever one's immediate gratification is. They would be trying to take on responsibility for the future from a simple, selfish, hedonistic perspective, because that is ultimately what's going to make you feel so good and so full and so healthy. Starting a business, right, of really having responsibility and being accountable and needing to show up and needing to put in work to hopefully help others and provide something of value of service, or entering a relationship. I mean, how many, what the, I don't want to use vulgar language, but the way that our relationships function today, where people can't commit to something that's longer than 1 or 2 nights, right? Because there's a quick gratification, there's no responsibility. But anyone knows this, and people even that are living that lifestyle know this, that committing to something which is sustainable and long-term and responsible, where you need to show up, the depth of pleasure that comes from such a relationship is so much infinitely better than what you're going to be getting out of your 1 or 2 night non-commitments. Even to be frank, even the sex in a committed relationship is infinitely better than the sex of a off chance, even with all of the excitement and all of the strangeness and all of the mystery and all of the unexpectedness. So this notion that we need to simply stretch our perspectives, right? It's funny that I'm saying this, because usually the mystics always talk about just to be in the now, to be in the present, to the future is where anxiety is and is worry is. That's all true, and I'm not taking away from that. But there's a way of living in the now where we can stretch that now and see that what we're doing now has effects on who we are, on that iteration of self down the line. And if we can make those decisions that don't just simply make us as free as we can be in the present moment, but make us as responsible as we can be in the present moment, that is really going to be the best way to live, without any, you don't need to believe in God for this, which is why it's so compelling. It's simply going to be the empirically the best choice we can make. So I think it's about knowing these things. These are the dharmas, for example. These are the truth that we know, and then finding people that we see that are doing this, right, that we can follow their example, and finding communities that can support us in these decisions, right? We all need friends and family and peers that can say, yes, we want your business to succeed. We want you to get up there and be in the morning and get on the hustle and bring value to others and show up and do the work and do the research, whatever it is. So it's having these truths and having people that we can aspire to be like, and having people that will support us in realizing these truths and enacting them.
Yeah, totally. And the point you made about, mystics are traditionally, it's all about the here and now, and but we can take that long-term view. I think the point that you're making around consequences, having the awareness to be able to see the consequences of your actions, is really important. And mysticism is about broadening your awareness and being aware of the consequences in the world of your actions, because you have such clarity and such insight and such wisdom that it's obvious to you what the consequences will be.
Yes. Yes.
And so yeah, it is about being here and now and having present moment awareness and knowing what is going on around me, but also having the clarity to be able to see those consequences very, very clearly. And oh, there was another point that was right there. I was just about to make, and it's gone. It was about no, I'll let it go. And if it comes back to me, it comes to me.
Try not think about it for a second, and it'll come back to you.
But I'll tell you, I've got it. So it was about, the community. It worked. Great work, Zevi. It was about the community, and you was talking about, if you were a pure hedonist and you were smart about it, you would take on responsibility, because that would increase your pleasure over the longer term. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But also there's a way in which we can show up in a community where we actually take the opposite approach. So rather than looking to maximize what's in it for me, we look to maximize what's in it for the other. And the more we do that, the more we are just in service and are serving heart and are looking for that I-thou relationship, to invoke Buber. Like, the more we can do that, and the more we minimize self-gratification and what's in it for self, the same thing happens. Like, the pure hedonist taking responsibility to maximize their experience, the more we are in service and self-sacrificing, actually, the nicer our experience of life is, because we don't get in our own way. We're not looking for maximizing pleasure and avoiding pain. We're just here. We're just present, and we're helping our, people around us. And in the strangest coincidence, it tends to, the experience of self becomes very, very thin, and it kind of dissolves. The sense of self dissolves, and it's a nicer way to be, rather than carrying around this huge, clunky ego that needs to be fed all the time. It is a glutton. That's, the ego is a glutton in its purest sense. And it's so counterintuitive and so ironic that that would be the case, but that seems to be the case to me.
Yeah, so that's it's very beautifully expressed. I like that metaphor of the heavy backpack that we're carrying around. It's a subtle point here. I want to get into this a little with you. But just to say something on the last point we were saying, I think that when we think about, when we expand our perspective and we think about the long term, we're not escaping the present moment. What we're doing is we're bringing the future into the present. And I think that's actually phenomenologically what happens, what it feels like, what we're doing. And I think that's important to highlight. But in terms of what you're saying here about the ego, I think it's a very interesting, the ego is really the elephant in the room. It's really the linchpin of all mystical traditions. And there's quite some vociferous debate and disagreement around it because of how tricky it is. Sometimes it's seen as just as the enemy. Sometimes it's seen as a real capacity for something positive. In Buddhism, I don't need to tell you this, but maybe for the audience, one of the basic metaphysical doctrines is that of anatta, that there is no self, right? The self is illusory. So in many mystical traditions, at least in many Western mystical traditions, there's this emphasis placed on, as you were saying, the ego as this burden, as this thing which just leads us to do things against our own true desire. And it's really the enemy, and it's something which needs to be annihilated and eradicated. And the second we can kill it, the sooner we can kill it, the freer we'll be. And there's a lot of truth to that, and there's a lot of beauty and rich poetic value in that mythos of the need to murder the self, to kill the ego. That's a big theme, which is a very exciting theme. There's some really great research done on that, of enacting that process of killing the self in indigenous traditions by Mircea Eliade in the Uranus conferences. Having said all that, I think there's two counterpoints to be made. And before I get back to mysticism, I'll make a counterpoint simply from a contemporary society standpoint. I think that message of the ego as something that needs to be annihilated is something which can be taught and sold in contemporary society. There's a recent book, a bestseller that came out called Your Ego is Your Enemy by Ryan Holiday, I think it is. It's like a topping Amazon bestsellers, and he just puts this case very, very simply and straightforwardly that doing things motivated by ego are ultimately going to undermine you, and he makes a very sweet case for that. But I think that for many people, they're not necessarily ready to have this to adopt this stance of no selfness that Buddhism mandates, and the death of the ego that others mandate, and they may be scared off and turned away by that. And I think that many people who sort of present or pretend as if they have no ego are actually really some of the most egoic people. And I'm always concerned when people say, "Oh, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this altruistically." I think the devil hides behind that. So I'd much rather someone just, "Okay, this is what I want. This is what I need," instead of hiding behind all these veils of spirituality. Sometimes is very dangerous. But so I think that if you're coming to just a normal person, if you tell them, instead of telling them, you need to murder yourself so that you can find your true self, which is no self, right? This getting into these metaphysics. Tell him instead that following this path, following these practices is the very best thing you could do for yourself, for your own ego. This is simply the being kind to others is simply going to be the best thing you can do. And there's empirical science to back this up, right? So there was experiments done where they gave people $50 to spend on themselves, $50 to spend on someone else, and then they self-reported their levels of satisfaction after they purchased something. And in almost every case, people who bought something for someone else felt better than those who bought something for themselves. And these are very clear empirical points that you don't need metaphysics. You don't need an Nagarjuna to explain this to you. This is like just simple science.
Yeah.
That's why I use this language of even as you are now, these are still the best decisions for you. So that's one reason why I'm using that language. The other reason is because that even within the mystical traditions, when they speak about killing the ego, the more mature mystics I find speak about the ego that's resurrected after that initial ego is killed, right? There's the phoenix, there's the reborn self, the true self, which for some is the all and for some is the none. And I think there's really the same things. David Loy has a great book called Non-Duality, where he shows why everything and nothing in Hinduism and Buddhism, phenomenologically and metaphysically, are really the same claim. But without getting too technical, the notion that there is a true sense of self that's integrated with the rest of reality, it doesn't see itself from separate from the rest of reality, that true ego has a real divinity and a real reality within it. It's the yesh amiti, to use the Jewish mysticism language, where the true divine self, the self that in Jewish history appears at Mount Sinai and says Anochi, says I am, is the same I am that Moses says, is the same I am that many great sages throughout Jewish history say, because it's the true ego. And by harnessing that true ego, harnessing that true self, which again is true simply by distinction, by fact that it's not caught into the illusion that it's separate from anything else. That is a really, really powerful truth that the mystics come to. And therefore I think that there is a need to this is going to sound really strange. There's a need to reincorporate the ego back into mysticism. And it's an ego that has been worked, that has gone through the process, this threefold process of this death, this humility, this able to stand apart from it, to then re-embrace it as a true self. I hope this isn't getting too technical.
No, I think that's great. Yeah. And I think you make a lot of really valid points in that. And yeah, the way I have kind of conceptualized it in the past, and it still kind of stands for me, is similar to when you said if you were just going up to a random person on the street and you're trying to sell mysticism to them, you wouldn't say, you're eventually going to kill your ego, because they're like, what are you talking? I don't want to do that.
No, thank you.
It's not going to work. You say this is the best thing for you, and you will feel better if you follow these practices and this path. It's kind of like the way I have conceptualized it in the past is your ego is very useful up to a certain point. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need to go up the rungs of the ladder towards self-actualization.
Great.
And it's only after we've achieved self-actualization that we can start to look at self-transcendence and what is beyond that. And it's almost like the ego gets stronger and more solid and more powerful up to a certain point. And then there's a tipping point where the ego starts to fall away, and then there's a death, and then who knows what the fuck happens after that, with my language. But yeah, I've heard accounts too of like there being, Ramana Maharshi used to talk about it as like the ego is still there, but it's like the ego used to be an elephant and now it's just an elephant's tail. It's like the slightest sliver of a tail is still there. Enough that when someone says Ramana, he'll turn his head and look at them like he recognized that's his name. And if you feed the elephant's tail, the elephant will grow back. So if you feed the ego will come back, and be fully alive. But if you just leave it there as a kind of like a string keeping you in this world. So you're not completely blown away into transcendence and you just disappear as an individual. You're still an individual embodied in the world. And the ego is kind of like your anchor in a way, but it is like the metaphor you used of a rebirthing phoenix from the ashes makes sense too. But that's the way I've conceptualized it. Is it's like almost a journey which goes up and then down, and then there's something that happens after the ego dies, and different masters and awakened people have talked about that through the ages, and yeah, who knows? Really, who knows? That is a mystery. There's a reason it's called mysticism.
Yeah. I very much appreciate that. I think there is a need for mystery, and I think mystery is important. I think that this subject of the ego needs so much exploration, both internally and in discourse, and the way we're speaking about it is so superficial, is so one-dimensional. This sort of the sense that the ego is your enemy. I've seen like this slogan, what is it? The ego is not your amigo. Like there's this kind of this very which, and there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that, and there's a lot of liberation in experiencing us being able to do things not from a place of self-centeredness, of ego. I think that we really need to think about how we're defining ego. I think defining it not just a sense of self, but sense of separate self, I think is very important. And to know that that's fundamentally illusory, and that it's illusory is something which is borne out by contemporary science. I think, without going too far down that path, but I think what you're saying is so important. There's so many things that need to be discussed when it comes to ego. This is like, I think there's hours and hours of discussion to happen here. But I really appreciate what you said, that the ego, we speak about eradicating the ego, but we don't speak about also the need to build up the ego. I think that's a really healthy, important thing. I think that a lot of people that come into spiritual and mystical traditions that hear about the need for fana, for bitul, for crucifixion, for nirvana, whatever the term is going to be used, this to extinguish the self. If they're coming from a place that doesn't have a strong sense of self, it doesn't have the self-esteem, and had what didn't receive the validation that it needed, if you begin to try and nullify that thing, it's going to be a real mess, and it's not going to be healthy. There's a real need, and this is something which I'm hearing new teachers coming and saying, which is so important. I want to repeat this for that reason, that you have to have Maslow's hierarchy. You have to have your security, your belonging, your self-esteem, and only then can you begin to, let's now deconstruct this thing which I see as myself. But it has to, and that's so important. And I so appreciate that you said that. I see this within my own community, where we speak a lot about bitul, is the word we use to nullify, to subjugate, to eradicate the ego. And people that are doing that from places that don't have already a strong, healthy, loving sense of self is not a healthy spiritual process. It's simply not. The Talmud and the later Jewish mysticism speaks about the need to have what you were calling the tail. In their language, they call it the shminis shebashminis, the eighth of the eighth, which is just that little fraction. And then again, and I think that when we go over that tipping point, beyond the death, one way which I've been conceptualizing is that there's three I's, like the letter I, the self. There's the big I, which is like the unrectified, or the unobserved, the unworked ego, which needs to be there. We need that healthy sense of I. We need that big I that fills up the whole pyramid of Maslow. And then once we have that, and that I can begin to cloud everything and begin to make us do things that are not in our best self-interest, we need to then bring it down to a small I, to like a non-capitalized I, just a silent I. That's, as you said, that can turn when we hear our name, that can look both ways when we cross the street, that can feed us when we're hungry, that can put us to sleep when we're tired. The ego is there for our survival, but not an ego that's going to make us rampant megalomaniacs who think that my benefit is more important than the benefit of someone else. And when we've gone through that death process of the small I, then perhaps we can enter the mystery of the big I. So that's the three I's is the way that I've been visualizing and thinking about it. But I think this is such an important discussion, and I think that it's a discussion which lacks so much nuance, and so I appreciate talking about this.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, it's probably a good place to end it there. We've been talking for about an hour and a half now, and I really appreciate this time. yeah, the energy and the aliveness you bring to the conversation. I can feel the energy and the enthusiasm that you have for these topics, and there's a flow and a dynamism to the way you're exploring these ideas with me. And it's really nice to be able to have you as an interlocutor and to bounce these things off you. It's been really enjoyable for me, and the depth of scholarship that you bring to the conversation with Jewish mysticism and yeah, your understanding in those areas, and not just in Jewish mysticism, might I say. You've quoted Buddhist scripture many times, and you know, have an eclectic understanding from many traditions. So it's really cool to be able to talk to you, and I appreciate your time, Zevi.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. I honestly, if you told me that we were only speaking for 5 minutes, I would have believed you, because it was such a blast to speak with you. And I think what's happening here, if we could just realize what's happening for a secon. I'm Australian, by the way. I don't know if you know this.
I
I'm from
didn't know
Sydney.
that you're from Sydney.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I heard you mention that.
So we live on two sides of this really great country, which I have a lot of love for. But the fact that you're on your journey, right? You're an Australian who's studying Buddhism, who's finding a way to deepen your own life and to bring more compassion and meaning into your existence. I'm a Hasidic Jew who grew up in a Hasidic community on the other side of the country. I'm now on the other side of the world. But the fact that we're sitting here, right? Like, when in history would someone who's deep in the practice of Jewish mysticism talk to someone who's deep in their practice of Buddhism? I'm not sure which exact tradition you belong to. And to be able to together come and share their ideas and share their energy and share their spirit to try and help guide and lead and inspire and invoke this in others. I mean, it's just it's such a mind blow what's happening here.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for inviting me on. Thank you, like, to God and to the universe that we're in a time and space where these conversations can be happening, and we're no longer, this is like religion 2.0. It's no longer like, my religion is true, your religion is fake, mine's better, I'm going to kill you if you don't believe in my prophet, and I'm going to, it's like wow, like, thank God we are by and large as a society past that, and we can now sit down and be like, there are fundamental realities that we are all trying to connect to as humans. Let's see how we can bring our own knowledge and our own wisdom to the table and discuss and move forward and inspire ourselves and others. So thank you so much for reaching out and for being part of this journey together. And ultimately, it's a journey of the self, right? Because we believe that everything is fundamentally one and unified, and therefore it's not me separately doing my thing here. That would be the live ego, and it's not you separately. It's all of us together as cells in this large organism we call the universe, moving towards enlightenment, moving towards compassion and kindness. So thank you for bringing me in on this conversation. I'm filled with gratitude and love. Thank you.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah, that touched my heart. Yeah, thank you, Zevi. And anytime you want to do this again, you just let me know. And
With
yeah,
absolute pleasure.
brilliant.
Good luck on your journey, my brother.
Take care, my brother.